inspired to push through. Because there's a spark in you. Breakthrough or bust. Hello, welcome to this very special edition of Breakthrough or Bust. We're doing a bit of a roundtable. This is something that came to me probably a couple months ago, and I wasn't quite sure how I wanted it to work out, how it was going to happen. And then recently we've had some news come out about things like Roe v. Wade, and considering how much here we talk about the feminine, I felt like, this is it. Here is the time to really have this beautiful round table of women having a discussion about what it means to be a woman in this country, in this world, and what, the new headlines mean for us in this time. I'm so honored to have three beautiful ladies joining me who I just think are so unique and so special because, as we know, women have been taught to stay in their lane, smile, right? Don't show discomfort. And these women, despite it all, speak. They speak their authentic voices, and they're creating that path for all of the rest of us because they're so incredible and vulnerable and brave and just amazing. So I want to thank them all for being here, especially with such a charged topic. And let me go around and introduce. I am going to start at least where I see everyone on my screen. So I'm going to start with Marilyn. Marilyn is an author, speaker, and coach who's inspiring others to break down stigmas and boundaries. And Elizabeth is a Reiki and crystal healer who has a long history of supporting women, not only in the work that she does now, but in the past in social services. And Krista is the host of I Am Awake, Now What? And she shares experiences of awakening, healing, and personal development. Thank you, ladies, so much for being here. How are you today?
Good.
Good. Thanks for having us.
Yes,
absolutely. Oh, absolutely. I'm so grateful to you all. And I wanted to start going back in time. Why is it that we have these laws in place, these Roe v. Wade laws? Why was it so important? I think I like to go back into it and discuss it just from a human being perspective. So many people get caught up in the minutia of cells versus life versus, right? And there's more to it than just the life that's being carried. There's the life that is carrying. And I know, a lot about what I've learned as a woman and a human went back to a time where, women may have been repeatedly raped by their own partners and forced to carry children that their bodies couldn't even handle because they've carried so often and so many times that they were literally dying of childbirth. Mm-hmm. And things like Roe v. Wade came about to protect us, to protect our bodies. I want to open it up here. Does anybody have anything they'd like to share or talk about?
Well, I just wanted to say one thing, and I don't know all the details yet, but we just heard this on NPR the other day, that Ben Franklin, did anybody hear this about Ben Franklin?
No.
That he was part of a book where they talked about, they didn't say abortion, they gave it a different connotation, a different name, but there was like a recipe in there with tinctures and remedies on how to basically abort. And it wasn't a religious thing. It wasn't where anybody put anybody down for it. It was just part of everyday life. If whatever, I mean, nobody to me has an abortion for recreation purposes.
Yeah.
So for whatever the reason, for me, it's always a good reason. And
Thank you so much for saying that too, because I feel like that's the argument that, women are just running around partying, having a good time, and yeah, let me run and get my abortion, right? Like it's like an afterthought, no big deal, right? Because women don't care, we're loose, and and thank you for saying that, because that is the exception. Yes, maybe there is some of that going on, right? There's all kinds in the world. But if we were to look at percentages, I would say that would be the absolute minutia, right? The smallest percentages. And that's where the argument is stemming.
Yeah, and I would like to pop in here and say, I think the bigger issue that I have with this as a person, and I know the breadth of this whole argument because of my religious upbringing, and Norma Corby actually came into our religious community at one point, and she flip-flopped over and over throughout her lifetime about being religious and not being religious, and she really became this political pawn in this entire argument through the entirety of her life, and really capitalized on Roe v. Wade as a way to like support herself, and that's never really talked about. So I want to raise that point too, and also just to say that the bigger issue I have with Roe v. Wade is that it takes away our right afforded in the 14th Amendment, which gives us our right to privacy. And also more than that, the idea in the Constitution that every human being is afforded life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, all of that is taken away from us. And really, when we think about this idea of Roe v. Wade as taking the right away of abortion, it's not really that. And I always try to hammer this home to people who get stuck in this religious argument. It's not a religious argument. It's an argument about bodily autonomy and autonomy of self that is being taken away from the feminine. And we have to ask if this is not, if we are supposed to be of equal parts and beings here in the United States under our law, our government law, you don't see that happening to men. And that should be the biggest red flag for anybody wanting to wade into this conversation, or even thinking about like, why should I care about this? Well, you should care about this because we're not asking the same thing of men. And that's incredibly disarming and also very scary, because this, when it gets overturned, which it will next month, it's going to lead to other things. And I don't think it's too far-fetched to say like, well, what about owning property as women? What about our vote, our right to vote? Like, we have been second-class citizens in this country for the entirety of its inception, and it's imperative that all of us energize everybody, men, women, about this, because it can become a very slippery slope down the road. And I think that's what I'm scared about as a 41-year-old woman, having been on both sides, seen both sides of it. I can see this going somewhere really dark, and it's very scary.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. And you're bringing to light, there are states individually that give rapists parental rights, right? When their victim becomes pregnant, the rapist has sometimes more rights than the mother. There are states that are looking to prosecute women if they have a miscarriage, which, I mean,
they just did it in, I think, Uruguay. They sentenced a woman for 2 years in prison for having an abortion. And that's what we're looking at. Mississippi just passed that law. So,
and this is even for women who naturally miscarry, even without, and I mean, I'm sorry, but anybody who's been through a miscarriage has been through trauma. And then to be criminalized in addition to that trauma, I think is honestly cruel and unusual punishment.
Well, I think like just reflecting on this, I've been really distressed about it. I mean, I have teenage daughters. This feels terrifying in terms of their future. I'm less scared for myself. I'm 47, but I think what people forget is that before Roe v. Wade, a lot of women died. Yes. I mean, women died. I'm sorry about my dog. Women died from illegal abortions because they were
Yes.
not done safely. They were not done with proper antibiotics. Women died of infections. And I happen to be friends with the Register of Deeds in my county. And he has been going through, he's a very pro-choice person, looking at death certificates from before 1973 when Roe v. Wade was legalized. And there are thousands of women who they're listed as having died from illegal abortions. And these
Yeah.
are women who had massive infections, and most of them are young. And, you know, this is often women who are married, who may not have been able to have more children because they couldn't support the ones they already had. They may have been rape victims. You know, we just don't know, but women died. And, you know, I feel like in this conversation, nobody cares, you know,
Yeah.
that adult women who are here already, who are alive and here and valuable because we exist, that our right to be alive is being threatened by
And
this.
it's not about it's not about the health and well-being. It's about control.
It's
Mhm.
absolutely,
Because if you
yeah.
look at I don't remember the numbers. I'm not that person, but I just listened to a whole thing about the numbers, and abortions have gone down
Mhm.
since all of this. So it's not rampant. It's not. This is about control. This isn't about right and wrong. This isn't about saving a life. This isn't about a heartbeat happening before 15 weeks. It's not about that. It's about
Yeah, it's
control.
power control.
If it wasn't about control, then we wouldn't be fighting about birth control too. That would be a no-brainer. Give everyone all the access they need, right? You know, and then great, we don't need to use abortion. But no, that's not happening either. And, you know, back when this all came to be, you know, if a man didn't step up and support a woman, right, which is oftentimes why she would have to abort because she couldn't do it on her own. She can't go get a job, or if she can, it's, you know, measly paying, and they don't have any patience for somebody who has obligations and can't be there all the time, or, you know, what have you. So it was hard for a woman to support a child as a single mother,
And it
which was
still is.
basically a death sentence for both of them now.
And it still
And
is,
it
right?
still is.
Yeah.
And that's what I wanted to speak to as well. You know, if we're so inspired by, okay, we want to keep all these lives alive, then where is the support after? And I was having this memory last week about when I was 17, I was a mother's helper. And I had a 9-month-old baby that I'd have in tow all the time, right? Sweetest little thing. And she adored me. So it looked like she was mine. And so there I would be going grocery shopping or whatever it was with this sweet little baby. And the faces, the responses, what I gathered from the community was so disapproving and just nasty. Like people shunned me and looked down on me and gave me nasty looks. And so this is it. So, I mean, do we want to support people to have these babies so that we can judge them?
I think you're talking to a larger systemic issue that exists in our society and has, because we started behind the mark as a gender, because we didn't have equal rights starting to at the beginning. And then when the first war happened and women had to go into the factories and started working, we didn't leave the workplace. So then we not only did we have to manage a household and children. On top of that, we never left the workplace. We never got paid equal pay for it. And it's this systemic root cause that goes back and back and back. And sometimes I get frustrated as well because people are not as blazed about, like, we all have to get together and decide that we're not doing this anymore as a collective, as a gender. And we need men to step up for us too, to say, like, okay, if we're gonna expect women to stay in the workplace because life is too expensive now, we need to subsidize childcare. We need to support social care systems. Like, there is a whole host of things that have gone off the rails because women continue to be considered second-class citizens in our culture. And so therefore we're always the afterthought. And I think it's imperative for us as women, wherever we are, just to continue to try to, catalyze people to change this narrative. And it's one of those things that it's so ingrained in I think our cultural psyche, that women just do this, and we don't have to. We have to believe that there's a better and different way. And it starts with all of us choosing differently.
Oh, yes. And speaking up and being inconvenient, right?
Yeah. And being
we have
uncomfortable.
to, yeah, we have got to speak. We must speak our authentic voices and not care who doesn't like it.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's up to us now. We're being represented by a group of people who have a history of sexual assault and harassment. So what does this tell you? This tells you that this is a person who does not value females, right? And so why does that person get to represent us? No, we've got to represent us. We've got to speak up. We've got to be inconvenient. We've got to not, make it pleasant for everyone. We need to challenge them with our words.
And I think we need to tell our stories too. And even though that can be painful and vulnerable, and in some ways, I'm just furious that we have to tell our personal stories to make people feel empathy for us as human beings.
Mm-hmm.
I think it is also very powerful to say, like, this is what happened to me. This was the choice that I made. This is why. I saw so many brave women doing that, like on my Facebook timeline, on, other social media sites, on Twitter, talking about their experiences with abortion. And, I have two dear friends who had to get late term abortions, who are from North Carolina, which doesn't do late term abortions, who had to travel out of state to get this done because their children were going to die as soon as they were born because of severe birth defects. I saw those friends be brave and tell those stories. They shouldn't have to tell those stories. I shouldn't have had to tell my story about getting pregnant when I was 19. I shouldn't have had to tell that story. It's really nobody's business. But the attack on our rights makes it people's business. If you're going to get in my bedroom, if you're going to get in my body and tell me what I can do and what I can't do, then you're going to hear from me. And, the thing is that having been in social work for so many years, there are so many women who have basically not had access to abortion, even with Roe v. Wade, because of state laws that are restrictive, because of how expensive abortion is. Medicaid won't pay for abortions, which is why it's so important right now to support our state abortion funds, because that's the funding for low income women to access abortion. And until our rights are taken away, granted, abortions are still going to happen. They're going to happen, but they're going to be dangerous. Mm-hmm. And that is, it is appalling. And I feel like one of the things that I've been furious about, in addition to this, the fact that this is even happening, is that I have seen men be silent. And I'm like, you are half of this equation.
Yes.
Do not become pregnant without you.
And one of the terms I heard somebody, I was in a back and forth with someone, and their comment to me was that, being pregnant, childbirth, that's the burden on the woman. And I'm like, wait, what? First of all, children are a gift. And yes, there are times when we're not ready for that gift, right? But burden, and that's how it's seen. And it's almost like, well, bummer. And again, I think this goes back to what Krista's saying about, the feminine being these second-class citizens and not understanding what the feminine is and what it represents, and making it wrong and bad and dirty and ungodly, right? So we punish her because we don't get her, and then we control her because we don't understand the feminine.
And it's not our fault that we can carry children. It's not our fault that we were designed this way and we're being punished because of our default setting that we are the ones who have to carry children to term. And that punishment of the burden that you're talking about is exactly that. And it doesn't fall on men, and it hasn't fallen on men, and men will not empathize or get into this until they feel some pressure, you know, and I think it's funny to watch on social media women call for like, you know, a ban on sex or, you know, whatever the case may
That
be.
was my go-to. I was like, we'll solve this right now.
Yeah, you know, like it's funny that like, you know, we're, you know, but I'm not a proponent of, you know, fighting fear with fear, because I think that doesn't work. But there does have to, like, we do need men in this fight, because we cannot do it ourselves, because the men are not listening to us. The very small minority that runs our country right now, that is insistent on pushing this power and control on the feminine, is not listening to us. So we do need men to step up. And also, like, one thing you said back there about the miscarriages being criminalized, they're also talking about coming for all types of birth control and IVF. And it's like, I kind of feel like the IVF is still so expensive that I feel like it's finally going to hit the expensive Republicans who are the ones who can afford it, and all of the, and surrogacy and all of that. Then maybe they'll feel it. You know, right now they don't have to feel it, because this is really affecting mostly women of low income and minorities. So everyone outside of that doesn't really have to get their hands dirty.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the states that have trigger laws, which means that as soon as Roe v. Wade is overturned,
Right.
abortion will be completely illegal in those states. Thankfully, North Carolina is not one of those. But many states, especially in the South, have this trigger law. It will immediately go into effect that there are no abortions available in these states. And the bottom line is, even in states where abortion will be available, we have so few providers now because of harassment, because of being killed. I mean, we have abortion providers who have been murdered because of
Which
being
is
providers.
Always an interesting dynamic to me, because we're so
Irony.
worried about lives and then we're killing people.
Right. And,
Well, and,
you know,
and
there's
Christians don't normally speak up for the death penalty either. So
right. I mean, it's
It-
totally
it's-
inconsistent.
a double-edged sword, basically.
Yeah.
Right. And I think you're so right, Krista, about minority women, low income women being the most impacted by this. You know, in terms of where, like, I think about, you know, so many Black women live in the South, where so many of these restrictive laws are, so many Latino women, you know, it is going to hit. And these are groups that are already disenfranchised in many ways and already earn less than white women, earn less than men in their racial groups. You know, it's, again, it becomes less and less accessible to people because they don't have money. And the thing is, like, as a white woman and as a white woman who has resources, I know that I could go somewhere and get an abortion if I needed to. I could. I have the resources. I could help my daughters access abortion. I can afford to stock up on some plan B. There are so many women who can't do that. And at the same time, you see these formula shortages. It's like, okay, we're going to make women have babies, and then we take away one of the ways that women feed those babies and keep them alive. I mean, it is ridiculous. And then our administration finds money for more police. You know, it's like, where are our priorities? This is not about life. This is not about support. This is not about what's best for the country. And the majority of Americans are pro-choice. Over 60% of Americans are pro-choice. That's men and women. And here we have these people on the Supreme Court, most of whom are conservative white men, being able to decide this when the majority of the country does not agree. What does that mean about our voice?
They were put in their positions under less than ideal conditions as well. So
Yeah,
I mean,
for this very purpose. Basically.
Absolutely.
You know, it's so astounding, and it's so obvious that when some, you know, I mean, the big conversation of the Heard and Depp trial has brought to light things that, you know, unfortunately we get to discuss and change because of things like that, things that explode in our face. And this is the same thing. That, you know, as far as a man being able to speak up, who's involved in domestic, who could be a victim of domestic violence. Let's say, for instance, it's not Depp, but there are men out there that are. This gives them permission to take a step out and share. The same thing with Heard. I'm not diagnosing her as having mental illness, but let's say, for instance, just the fact that this conversation has happened, now there's more eyes and ears and awareness on what does it mean to have a personality disorder? What does that look like? Now here, a lot of us have, I mean, I've interviewed people before who are for, pro-choice and, all, social workers and what have you. But a lot of us haven't been in a position where we've had to like protest and fight for this right until now. I haven't had to do that, right? I've listened, I've shared, I've interviewed, I've spoken out, but now I'm mortified. And so there's a lot of me's and us's around where if it wasn't for this disgraceful thing, this wouldn't be one of the topics I would be choosing to talk about, but now I am. And
Yeah.
now my 68-year-old face is on things talking about this because, I want other people to talk about it. I want people to examine whatever. And I've gotten some negative comments back, but some of them I've addressed. If there was some kind of, something reasonable in the comment, I addressed it. If it was not nice at all, I just like, what am I going to waste my breath for, right?
Yeah.
But it's not going to stop me and it isn't going to stop us, but we all need to talk. And these kinds of things get us talking.
Yeah.
And we need to action it out, like for whoever's listening, once this goes on the air, it starts with voting, it starts with taking local offices, it starts with
Yes.
educating the people in your community, speaking up. Like there are actionable steps that all of us have to take in order to make this change. And I think, I'm not really sure, and I know we can't group ourselves as a collective, but I still don't understand how come there are still so many women, even though, like to your point, Elizabeth, that we carry this choice position, but then we're not getting involved where it matters. I don't understand where that disconnect is happening. And I wish I did, because I feel like that would be the secret sauce to start engaging and mobilizing women in a way that could change things. Like, why are we still here in 2022,
I think
still
it's the
getting paid
fear.
less than men? Yeah,
I
still
think
less
it's
than
the
men, all the
fear.
things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're so programmed. And, I talk about that all the time. I mean, from hundreds of years ago, that same behavioral programming is being passed down generation to generation to generation. And oftentimes we don't even know the source of it. We don't understand that this was maybe for, 200 years ago, when we stepped out of line, a man might have gotten heavy-handed with us. So mothers taught us to be quiet and stay in our lanes so we didn't get beat up and we didn't get attacked. And right. And then that kind of, I mean, as a child, it was always the women in my life who kind of shushed me and get back in place, because I was a mouthy little thing. And then as I got older, and then when I had children, I talk about, well, then I got real meek and quiet. Like I didn't want to put them at risk of scrutiny because of my big mouth, right? And then I caged myself. And now I'm spending my time undoing what I have done and doing that for my children as well. But it's just this social programming that gets passed down, and it's oftentimes I think people don't even realize they do it. And I talked about that even with the slap that we heard around the world. Immediately, everybody vilified Jada Pinkett. Why? Because she rolled her eyes, because she didn't and show a pleasant face and just, okay, whatever. She's a pretty authentic woman. She showed an authentic reaction, and immediately we didn't like it, because women are supposed to be pleasant, not show discomfort or dislike.
Or just to take it.
Just take it, deal with it. And so you see everybody blaming a woman. We watched this man walk up, slap this man, sit back down and curse. And we're like, Jada's evil. What? And we don't even realize it. People don't even realize that that's what has happened, that we just took this narrative and flipped it because of old programming that we just don't even consciously realize. And I think that's where women, that's why you've got to get uncomfortable. That's why you've got to be willing to speak no matter what looks you get, no matter what people are saying. And honestly, take that as comfort. If you're getting disapproving looks, then you're on track.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, if you subscribe to the idea of generational trauma, which I do, I think there's significant generational trauma in so many populations in the United States. I mean, certainly Black folks, certainly Indigenous people. I think also Latina, Asian people who have been so mistreated here for generations. But I think women as a collective also have generational trauma. I think if you go back to, women who were healers, midwives, the women in the community were the ones who knew the medical arts. They were the ones that helped with birth. They were the ones that helped with death. And, these were the women who helped women who had been raped to not have to carry a rapist baby. These were the women who helped women deliver healthy babies. And, that got taken away from women, and women started to be suspected as being witches, as being Satan adjacent, as not being spiritual, as not being religious, as being bad women. And, it went to the extremes of people being hanged, of people being burned, and I think we retain that somewhere. And that is a terrifying thing to have in our generational, in our DNA. And so I think when we talk about why aren't more women involved, and what Kalua said about fear, I think is profound. I also think that, white women in particular, by being adjacent to white men, get some of their power. We get some of their privilege by being adjacent. And we are too willing, and I say this for myself, we are too willing to look the other way when women who are different than us are being mistreated and marginalized, because we don't want to give up the little bit of power that we get by being
insight. Wow.
In a relationship with a white man. And, I've really had to get outside of that mindset as an activist, as a social worker, just as somebody who cares about women globally, to see that like my experience as a white woman is not the same in many ways as the experience of minority women, but I still can support those women and have solidarity with them. And, we can support each other and have solidarity. But I think having women who are pro-choice in positions of leadership, having women who are pro-choice being, elected officials, being on school boards, being more women getting trained to be OBGYNs and to learn how to perform abortions. We have medical students who aren't willing to learn how to do it, partially because they're afraid of what's going to happen to them. And, this idea that like these threats are going to keep us from rising up. I mean, I'm sorry, but F that. Like, we need to be angry. We need to be in the streets. We need to be visible. I'm not going to be quiet about this. I'm not. And if somebody needs a ride to another state to access abortion, I'm taking her. If like I can fund somebody to travel to get an abortion, I'm doing that. I have resources. That's a way I can help. We need to think about concrete things we can do individually and as a collective to support other women and being able to have bodily autonomy. And, I agree, Krista, this is the tip of the iceberg.
Yes.
If you look at other court cases, you look at Griswold and the right to access birth control. You look at Obergefell with the right to same-sex marriage. You look at Lawrence v. Texas with the right to privacy for our sexual lives. These are all things that were absolutely touched on in Alito's draft opinion, that he thinks these were all bad decisions. That means, birth control could be criminalized again. And as Krista was saying, our right to vote, our right to hold elected office, our right to have our own bank accounts, all of that. I mean, my mother could not write her own check when she first got married in 1969.
Yeah,
it was
not until the 70s.
Bank account. This is not that long ago.
No.
It's all related. It's all interconnected. This is everyone's fight.
Absolutely. And I'm almost hesitate to share this. I don't ever want to inspire people through fear. I always like to do it through love. But at the same time, I guess sometimes it's important to know the stories
Or
to
to
be
know
inspired.
what's at cost,
Yeah,
right?
and I
Not to
mean,
come from that place of fear, but to know what there's so much here for us to
yes.
lose.
And
Yeah.
I mean, I remember my tenure in human services, and one of the clients I worked with was a young lady, white woman actually, but she was a lesbian. And some man decided that she needed to be punished for that. And he raped her on the sidewalk in broad daylight. No one did anything. That was his form of punishment. And this is where I think the fear, right? Is when we hear about stuff like that, or we've experienced it either this lifetime or previous lifetimes, or people in our generations, right? In our history, our family have experienced. And that's why we've got to do the healing. We've got to do the healing
And
so
talking
that we
about
can
it.
step up.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
And if
sharing
we
the
hold it,
stories.
and it's holding it back that creates the fear.
Yeah.
I think talking,
Yeah.
I mean, I often, whatever the subject matter might be, often say we have to, in a good, loving way, commercialize this information. It
Yeah.
cannot be held back. It has to be common knowledge. Everybody, I mean, I do some work in the opioid addiction world, and I say everybody that's breathing needs to know something. Because the more we know, the less scared we're going to be. Because,
Yeah.
stuff just makes sense.
And
Common
coming
sense
together.
common
Yeah.
sense
And
makes sense.
women are so powerful, especially in community. Women make or break a community. And that is why we've been separated. That's why a lot of this has happened. That's why we disempowered the healing women, so that, the medical community could take over. And look where that got us, right? We're run by big pharma and insurance, right? Our whole country is run by that. So this is why we have got to be in connection with each other, supporting each other, celebrating each other, lifting each other up. I think it's so important to everything that we do going forward.
We have to
Yeah,
show
it's
people
been
how to.
oh, go ahead.
No, I was just
Marilyn.
going to say, we have to show people how to do that. For people who can lift people up, for people who can be with the glass half full, we've got, I mean, and I consider myself to be one of those, and I'm making a good assumption that you all are as well. We got to share. We got to speak up. We can't be afraid to do this. We have to show people emotion. We have to show, coming together, camaraderie, and we have to help men too. Help men with a megaphone, because they don't always ask for it in a nice way. But it's, you got, look, it's what we have to do. I mean,
Yeah.
it may not be the ideal thing. I don't want to have to walk on eggshells to help somebody yet. If that's what it's going to take for people to speak up, for people to realize truth and connection and where we all come from and the common sense of things, everybody's got to come out to this, everybody, young, old, middle, black, white, Chinese, everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just wanted to echo what you said, Kalua, a little bit more about how powerful we are. And it's something I stress constantly. And in my upbringing, that was like very crazy and a religious experience. All of that's embedded in suppressing the feminine. So it's been my life's work to undo that in all of the women I meet. And I sometimes I am stopped in my tracks at how powerful women can be when they summon their own internal resources of strength, compassion, kindness, intelligence, and bravery, and go into the world and say, enough is enough. And I just think that we have an immense amount of power individually, but to your point, collectively, we could change everything tomorrow. And the other thing that's funny is, like, when you think about systemic issues, like, we could easily, when we talked about the not having sex, actually what we could do is take our money somewhere else to a bunch of other places and impact the economy tomorrow.
Thank you. I was
Topple
thinking
big
that
business,
too.
like say, if we don't get abortion rights, or if you don't fight for our right to privacy or same-sex marriages, all of this, well, fine, I'm not shopping at Amazon anymore. And you know what? I'm not going to get my gas here. Like, we have so much immense power because we hold so much economic interest in our country. We forget that as women because we're managing so much. I don't have children, but I know people that do, and you're managing a whole micro economy in your family that you could turn on its head tomorrow. So there's creative ways that we can address this and have our voices heard in really interesting and powerful ways. And I think we just have to dialogue about what does that look like? And then collectively, we need to start going after those things because it could make a huge impact and it could really set the lawmakers, on notice, basically.
Yeah, I love that.
Absolutely. I mean, I think collective action around the economic impact is huge.
Mhm.
Women, it's actually, there's a lot of data that show that women make the most of the economic decisions in families.
Mhm.
And, we also spend more, we buy more, we tend to be the shoppers. We invest less because we have less to invest, but that could change too if women collectively got together and invested in companies that were supporting our rights, that were taking a stand.
Yeah.
There have been some companies that are doing that who have said, we are going to pay for our employees to get abortions, even if that means them going to another state. We're not going to operate in these states that aren't going to have abortion available to people. Seeing more companies doing that because of pressure from women could be an incredible way to shift the narrative. And, and I so agree, Klua. I mean, I really try not to lead with fear too. And I try not to lead with anger. I admit I've been afraid and angry about these possibilities. But as a healer, I want to look for the places where we can build healing and where we can remember our sovereignty and our importance, and we can let go of shame. I mean, I think something that holds women back and keeps us silent so much is shame, because shame has been used by religion primarily to keep women in their place. And, I happen to still have faith, and my faith tells me that none of this is right, that oppressing women is not what God wants. And, I think more of us who are in the faith community need to be speaking about that, and more faith leaders need to be speaking about that. And I have seen some coming out about it for sure, especially in the Jewish community. There's been a lot of outrage and a lot of speaking up. But, I think, again, that's where the healing can come, is where we find this common ground, where we find these common experiences, because most women, have gone through something that is related to reproductive health and rights, whether it's childbirth, whether it's a sexual assault, whether it is infertility. We've dealt with this, and the sharing our experiences, I think, is so powerful. And then translating that into action about our shared experiences. I think we can't just talk about it. I think conversations are important, but then we have to do something.
And we have to bring in the younger kids. We have to bring in our youth a lot. We need to bring them in, as early as you can, but they need to be part of all these kinds of conversations because they're it.
Yeah,
that was important for me.
There's a couple of young people in my life that had no idea what this would mean. And, they're not interested in the news. And to be quite honest and transparent, I don't know that I was at 18, 19, 20 either. So you're right, Marilyn, we need to go and, make sure they're part of this conversation as well.
This was something that I very consciously taught my daughter. But when this all came to be, that one of her biggest shocks were like, why is nobody saying anything about this? Like, why aren't my friends talking about this? And because they hadn't been taught. And that was why I wanted to start with going backwards a little bit here, because I don't know that people appreciate how many women died. I mean, when you're willing to take a turkey baster of bleach up yourself, or take a wire hanger and spin it around up, I mean, that's desperation. That's not about, hey, I had a great time last night, but I don't feel like having a baby. No, that's not what that is. That's like no hope.
And even with the birth control trials, when they started, hundreds of women died in the birth control clinical trials. 7 men died on birth control trials at the same time, and they stopped those. Like, I don't know how much more evident it needs to be that, like, we are not a society that cares and elevates the feminine. And that's the root cause of it all. And we need to go to the root cause and just, do our best to just unravel it all, undo it all, topple it, everything, all the things.
In a
So,
strange way, I think that this is sort of the beginning of the healing of that. It's kind of like, we've just seen Black Lives Matter under attack. We've seen the LGBTQ community under attack, and now it's women. And it's just, I feel like these blisters deep in the foot of our country that are coming to the surface. And so it's like just festering and raw and awful. But without it coming to the surface, we don't have the appreciation, the awareness. Like, even for me, I was shocked about, watching some of the things with Black Lives Matter and the Don't Say Gay bill. And like, I lived in Florida. Hello, way to not represent your population. And again, that kind of goes back to that spending your money. Like, there's a map out there that shows who is not going to allow abortion. Well, damn it, don't vacation there. Do not spend your money in that state. Just, yeah, I can't say enough. Vote with your dollars, because truly in this country of ours, that is your best voting tool.
Agreed. And, I think in terms of engaging young people, I've been so proud of the young people in my community who are speaking out about this. Both of my daughters have participated in walkouts at their schools about choice and have done speak outs. And, boys have participated in that as well, have stood in solidarity with the girls. This has been at a middle school and a high school. And there has been, I would not say like support from the administration, but children have not gotten in trouble for missing class for the most part locally. And, that just gives me so much hope, because, these children, they've never known what it was like to live without access. And so I think some of them need to be educated about what it was like before. But I also think, in some ways it's a good thing that they've taken for granted that they had these rights, because now they are super offended that anybody would take this away. They're not going to go down quietly about this, because to them, this is like basic. This is a human right. This is a human rights issue. And, I just think the more we can engage young people and encourage them to use their voices and, have a dialogue between older generations that have seen what it was like before, teaching younger people, and younger people teaching older people about what it's like for them now, like that cross-generational, intergenerational conversation, which I think is another way to heal. Having girls and women, learn from each other. I think that's a huge piece of it too.
I think what will be really interesting to see too is how the millennials take this fight on as well, because they have been historically holding off on having children because of their financial situation, which has really impacted them, plus the generation after them. It'll be interesting to see how much longevity they have as well in this all of the generations, but them particularly, because if they're forced to have children, I feel like that might really change the narrative too. And they're a huge population right now that is being directly impacted by this, because they're in that childbearing age. And to me, I think that'll be interesting to see how they combat this as well.
Do you think any of what's going on as far as these primaries now, some of what will result in the results can be an indirect correlation to how people are feeling about, let's say, this, and even voting rights? I mean, in some places, I'm astounded. I just read a book. I don't know if you're all familiar with Diane Chamberlain. She's a New York Times bestselling author, and she actually lives in Raleigh. And she's become a little bit of a friend. And she wrote a book about voting rights, which was back in the '60s, and it just came out. And I swear, If she had a crystal ball to know what was going to happen with currently with voting rights, I wouldn't have been surprised, because what she has in the 60s in that book reflects what's being done now with voting rights. And it's all wrong. It's all wrong. And I can't imagine how this is going to go forward when it's so wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the disenfranchisement of so many people, especially marginalized people, through these voting rights limits, through, I mean, it's just ridiculous how many barriers there are to vote, especially in southern states, which have the legacy of Jim Crow, the legacy of slavery. I mean, talk about a time when Black women's bodies were completely controlled by the white population, and during the time of enslavement, Black women were forced to nurse babies that weren't theirs, and their own babies starved to death. I mean, if that's not about reproductive rights and the right to our own bodies, and the legacy of that, I mean, it is reflected now in, the powers that be trying to stop Black people from voting, trying to stop immigrants from voting, I mean, the next thing could be women, and this is, I mean, voting is one of the ways we use our voice. It's not the only way. The elected officials can't solve everything. We have to solve things ourselves too. But, I think that, yeah, I mean, people fought too hard and died for all of these rights that we have today, whether it's our voting rights, whether it's our rights to our bodies, whether it's our rights to love who we love and marry them. People fought too hard for us to not speak up now about all of these things.
And you're
It all
right.
comes down to basic human dignity. This is about the dignity of each person.
Yeah.
You're right. I'm sorry for interrupting. You're right. And we've won a lot of, as small as they may have been, they have been steps forward. And I can't for the life of me see people giving up those steps.
Right.
Yeah, I'll just say this one last thing about that whole. I want to emphasize how strategic, organized, and focused the right has been. That they have gone over through every aspect of our political system, through gerrymandering, through taking away mail-in voting, by taking away rights to stand in line very long. They've also taken away voting centers, especially here in Texas. It's been exceptionally difficult to vote now here in Texas. And it's all because of the control and the power, which are, the two main motivators of the right. And I don't even want to say the Republican Party, because it's all becoming a very weird thing. But like the conservative movement in America has been incredibly systematic, organized, and focused. And in some ways, we all need to have that same mentality about how we go about reversing all of this. And it starts like today, there's a primary vote here in Austin today. And all over the world, in Georgia, or all over the country, in Georgia too. It starts by like everybody voting in those elections as well. We forget how many elections there are. We sometimes just get focused on the senator and congressman votes and then the presidential election. But the real decisions at the core are being made in these smaller elections, and one that's even happening right now in Arizona, which is really scary. I'm sure you guys have all heard. Ginny Thomas, which is the wife of Clarence Thomas, reached out to that judge in Arizona about the election results. That wife now is running to be the person who oversees election results in Arizona. She's probably going to win. I mean, it can't be overemphasized or overstressed how strategic they are about making sure that this very small minority blocks the will of the population. And we've got to put a stop to it. We have to.
What I'd like to do, because I know we're running out of time, kind of in the spirit of breakthrough or bust, I like to share a little nugget of wisdom. So what do you want to say? Because it's a little different. Normally, the story is all wrapped up. We know what's going to happen. We're still in the story this time. Well, what do you want to say to the men and women? Because remember, we need you men too, to going forward with all of this. And I'll go in the same order I did with the introductions. Marilyn, do you want to?
would say to go into your heart
Mhm.
and to really listen. Don't listen to the noise around. Don't listen to your history. Don't listen to whoever is yelling at you or yelling through the TV. Listen for yourself and listen to what really makes sense, and really analyze the real data and what you really feel. And the truth is the truth.
Oh, thank you, Marilyn. Elizabeth, what would you like to say?
I would just really like to urge people to get involved in your community. If you're not already involved in, efforts to provide abortion to marginalized people in your community, get involved there. If you're not involved in conversations with young people about, what this means, get involved there. If you're not involved in, think about running for local office. It's local and state offices that make so many of the decisions that impact our daily lives. Think about where you can lead, where you can help, where you can change things, and go there. Be brave.
I love it. Thank you, Elizabeth. Krista.
Yeah, I guess my last negative wisdom will be to the women and the men, and basically to women, to remind you of your own power to fight against that internal fear and conditioning that Kalua talked about, that is very real, that generational trauma that Elizabeth spoke about. It's real, and we have to face it, and we have to not be scared of the boogeyman that's in front of us as women, because we are the masters of our own destiny, and nothing changes unless we do. And then to the men, it's time for you guys to get off of your bums, get up and help us relinquish some of your privilege and your power and send it back to the feminine, because when we suffer, you suffer, and maybe you don't feel it on the day to day, but collectively you will see it happen to us, and it affects all of our lives. And so our lives are intertwined with one another, and we need each other, but we especially need men to walk this walk and fight this fight with us.
Thank you. And mine, I'm actually going to share one today too. If you've ever been bullied or in a toxic relationship, the power that person has is really just an illusion, right? They present as if they have this power over you. But when you break through that, illusion, you realize they don't. Only you can give them that power. And that's sort of what's happening here. We're being bullied, but we don't have to let them bully us. We don't have to accept that they have power over us, because truly they work for us. Our government is supposed to work for us. So I urge you to remember your power and to take it back and to stand up, whether just on your own or with others, however it is. And the ladies gave some really great ideas as far as sharing stories, voting with your dollars, getting involved with your local abortion centers, or talking to the young people, all of these things. But just know that you are powerful enough to do it, that your voice is so needed, and you are so worthy. And thank you so much for listening. Ladies, thank you so much for being here and talking about this. I am so, so grateful to you. And I'm just like, I'm inspired. I just like, oh, I can feel like energy running through me right now. Thank you so much, ladies. I appreciate
Thank you
you.
for having
Yeah,
us.
thank you,
Nice to
Kalua.
meet you all.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Kalua. And thank you,
Yes.
Marilyn and
Thank you.
Krista.
Yeah.
And for all of you, remember, keep pushing through, because there is a spark in you.